I've been collecting movies for a long time now and have built up a sizable collection, but anyone that curates a movie library has those discs or tapes that just sit on the shelf waiting to be watched. And now with the convenience of streaming and having access to so many movies, those movies that are sitting in my collection have built up. I decided to take on a challenge. The rules were I only had to watch things on physical media that I owned. That meant I couldn't stream anything or rent anything. If I wanted to watch something specific but didn't own it, I had to buy it physically. Having this limitation was such a great change up, and honestly, I just love this little challenge of mine. So with this, I just wanted to go through the entire month of what I watched for this challenge. I'm going to keep each of these entries brief since I have a lot to go through. First was a rewatch of the movie Sleeper, which I own on Blu-ray. It's been a number of years since I'd seen this movie, but there were certain scenes that always stood out to me, particularly scenes that play out just like a Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd comedy. Overall, it was such a delight to rewatch this. It's short, very consistently funny. Diane Keaton is fantastic in this, and the absurdist comedy just flies by. Next, I watched Sentet, which I recently bought on Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome. This was a huge surprise to me. While I was expecting to see some crazy effects-driven horror, I was not expecting to be incredibly engrossed in this story. This movie also has an incredible villain in it that you're just waiting to see some horrible stuff happen to. This also has one of the most abrupt tonal shifts in any movie I've seen, where for about 45 minutes, it's an engaging horror fantasy. Then, all of a sudden, for no reason, a random side character breaks out into a 10-minute comedy musical number about Rambo. And then the movie just continues from where it left off before. I kind of loved that tonal shift after the movie was over. This also has a lot of gross effects work, and some where I really did not know how they did them. This was a great little gem from Vinegar Syndrome. Next, I watched the movie A Soldier Story from 1984. I own this movie on DVD. This is one of the more obscure Best Picture nominees that I can think of. I really don't hear that many people talk about it. And as a whole, the movie kind of acts as a spiritual successor to Drewson's other movie, In the Heat of the Night. While the actual murder mystery in A Soldier Story is the kickoff, it really starts to transform into a character study of Adolf Caesar's character, who is fantastic in this movie, as well as Denzel Washington in a very early role for him, but who steals every scene he's in it. Plus, there is a surprise performance by Wings Hauser, who I just love seeing pop up in movies. Next was a rewatch of the movie Hell's a Poppin', which I own on DVD. I included this movie on an earlier Film Discoveries video and haven't watched it since. Rewatching it now, this movie just keeps getting better and better with each viewing. This movie is so ahead of its time with its pacing, joke density, and the fact that it's playing with genre tropes, and even tropes of breaking the fourth wall. The movie doesn't let up or give you a chance to breathe. The fact that this movie is not in the conversation of greatest comedies is just insane. Next is The White Dawn from 1974, directed by Philip Kaufman. I watched this on a Kino Lorber Blu-ray. For the longest time, I only knew Kaufman's work from his remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is one of my favorite movies, and it's a movie that honestly gets scarier and scarier as I get older. Last year, I watched The Wanderers and loved it. With The White Dawn, this is a psychological survival adventure set in the Canadian Arctic. The entire cast, from the three leads to the tribe, are fantastic. There is an underlying tension throughout where you have no idea where this thing's going to break at. After viewing this movie, I've really come to the realization that Philip Kaufman is truly a fantastic horror director, and that he was the perfect choice for Body Snatchers. In the movies that I've seen from him, there is always a scene which I consider them horror sequences. Obviously, you have the entirety of Body Snatchers. In The Wanderers, there are two sequences that I would consider effective horror sequences. And then the last few minutes of this movie, I would also put into that category. Next, I watched Clay Pigeons, which I own on DVD. This is a fun little 90s neo-noir crime thriller that is really driven by the performances. Joaquin Phoenix is really good and also displays a lot of what I would call his acting styles, if that makes sense. I also think Vince Vaughn is very, very good in this movie and is able to bring about this dark comedy with this very sinister character. Overall, this was a fun movie to watch and to see where the plot takes you, even if it's messy at times. Next, I watched A Perfect World, which I own on Blu-ray in this Clint Eastwood 20 film collection that I've probably had for 10 years. This was a fantastic surprise in the sense I loved how dark this movie got, particularly with Kevin Costner's Butch character. As a whole, I think that this might be Costner's best performance next to JFK. Eastwood directs this with such precision. And lately I've been on a Clint Eastwood kick and have come to really appreciate the things that he does behind the camera. Next was a rewatch of Southern Comfort, which I own on this old DVD. I've always really enjoyed this movie, and I saw it when I was younger and trying to track down all the Deliverance-like movies. Probably my favorite out of all of them is Rituals. With this rewatch of Southern Comfort, I really picked up on the performances of Keith Carradine and Powers Booth and how good they are together. I also love the companionship with Hill's other movie, and probably my favorite of his, The Warriors. Next, I watched Elephant by Gus Van Sant, which I own on DVD. I'd known about this movie for years. I knew the style, I knew the ending, and I knew the structure. And even the fact that it won both the Palme d'Or and Best Director prizes at Cannes, but just had never sat down and watched it. And even though I essentially knew everything about this movie floored me. The attention to detail is outstanding. The long takes are hypnotic and lull you in and brings about this escalating tension throughout. Next, I watched Born to Kill from 1947, directed by Robert Wise. I watched this on DVD. The one intriguing thing about this movie was that the fact that it starred a very young Lawrence Tierney, which made me really excited to see it. And unfortunately, this movie was kind of a letdown. It's not bad at all, but just for long stretches of it, I was really, really bored. There's a central romance in the movie that I felt dragged the movie so much. And as for Tierney's performance, I really didn't think he was that good in this movie. He plays this character very one note, and I was just never interested to see where it went next. The only highlight for this movie was Elijah Cook Jr., who I always love seeing pop up in movies. Next, I watched $1 Million Mystery, directed by Richard Fleischer. I saw this on a Kino Lorber Blu-ray. I have really grown to love Fleischer as a director. This was the last movie he directed, and it's essentially a riff on It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. For the longest time, all I heard was how terrible this movie was and that it's basically a gimmick movie to sell bags. And I surprisingly really liked this movie, up to about 95% of the movie. The car chases in this movie are insane and so well filmed that it's no surprise that the DP is none other than Jack Cardiff. And I was honestly loving the movie for the most part, but the ending of this movie completely fails in a very unsatisfying way, to the point where I was kind of shocked of how abrupt the movie ends. It's kind of the equivalent to the ending of The Devil Inside, where the movie just ends and in order to complete the story you have to go to a website. It's in a similar vein to that. Not all the humor works and some of it is incredibly unfunny, but I don't know, I just loved watching it and I must have just watched it on the right day. Next, I watched Heard She Got Murdered, which I own on Blu-ray from Gold Ninja Video. This is a sequel to Heard She Got Married and delves back into the Motown Media universe. I love all these movies, and this one takes a turn that it expands upon in the first and has one of the funniest endings I've ever seen. Next, I watched Flesh and Bone from 1993, which I own on DVD. This is a neo-noir that has an amazing cast to it. It has a fantastic and bleak opening that truly goes for it. The rest of the movie is good, but it doesn't quite hit the heights of that opening. And I feel that the movie could vastly be improved by editing. I just think it's way too long for where the conclusion is going towards. If this was stripped down to a brisk 90 minutes, this movie would fly by. Next, I watched Play It Again Sam, which I recently bought on DVD. This was a very fun, light on its feet comedy. It really helped the experience that I had just recently watched Casablanca just last month, and it had been at least 10 years since I first saw it. So it was very fresh in my head, and I think this is honestly the best way to watch this movie. You watch Casablanca, then you wait a couple of days, and then you watch Play It Again Sam, and soak up all the love for film in this movie. Next, I watched Bloodstream. This is my further delve into the Michael J. Murphy Blu-ray box set. So far, I've seen Invitation to Hell and Death Run, and I think this is my favorite so far. The setup is great, and the whole movie is populated by these horror movie scenes. You reach a certain point where it's just hypnotic. Next, I watched Hardware, which I own on an old Severin DVD. I know that this movie does have a huge cult following, and I understand why. This movie looks insanely good for its budget, but that's kind of what you hear about this movie a lot. I just kind of found it a slog to get through. The visuals didn't keep up the momentum for me, and I just started to get bored over time. Next, I watched Critters 2, which I own on a DVD 4-pack with the other Critters movies. The first Critters I have only seen probably twice in my life. It's the classic scenario of watching it on TV as a kid, and I've always just thought the first one was just okay. The second was a very enjoyable watch. I love that it expands on the first one and incorporates the whole town this time. Overall, this is a fun watch. Nothing too special. Next, I watched Electric Glide in Blue. I own this one on a Shout Factory Blu-ray. This is a very grimy 70s cop thriller with a fantastic performance by Robert Blake. The best way that a lot of people describe this movie, and I agree with, is Easy Rider but with cops. The ending shot of this movie is something I really have never seen in another movie before, and just describing it doesn't do it justice. Overall, this is a really solid piece of 70s filmmaking. Next, I watched Jane Austen's Mafia, which I have on an old clamshell VHS. This one is kind of a mixed bag. There's some really funny gags in this movie, but there are sections that really grind to a halt. But I wouldn't say that it tips over into boring. It's definitely not in the Mount Rushmore of Zaz-style comedies, but it's probably right in the middle. Next, I watched The Bridges of Madison County, which I own on an old DVD. I flat out love this movie so much and was completely taken by surprise as to the pace of the movie. It's deeply romantic, funny, heartbreaking, it's everything. Meryl Streep is amazing in this, but I was really blown away by Eastwood's performance. If he could not pull this character off, the entire movie doesn't work. And I think he crushes it to the point where I think that this is his best performance he's ever given. Next, I rewatched Stalag 17, which I recently bought on 4K from Kino. I had seen this movie a number of times growing up and have always really loved it, but I hadn't seen it in a number of years and was really curious of how it holds up. And I was just blown away by this rewatch. This is climbing the ranks as to one of my favorite movies of all time. It's definitely not for everyone. It leans on the comedy heavy on the first half. But as the mystery element starts to build on who might be the informant, the film starts to strip away that comedy until it's genuinely tense in the last 20 minutes of this. Next, I watched The Wicked from 1987, which I own on VHS. This comes from the director of Long Weekend, which is one of my favorite horror movies ever made. With this coming from that director, I was kind of disappointed by this. It's a vampire horror comedy that really leans into the comedy. There's just not much to this movie. It gets incredibly dull, and throughout most of the runtime, I was just bored. Next, I did a rewatch of Big on VHS. I hadn't seen this in a number of years, and it was a movie that was always on TV. My opinion of it is about the same. I think Tom Hanks is really good, but that's nothing new coming for this movie. But the overall movie is just okay. It's the perfect movie to watch on TV where you can hop in at different places. Lastly, I finished this challenge with some Hitchcock. I watched The Wrong Man, which I own on this Hitchcock 4-pack. I'd never really heard much about this movie. It's not really discussed often in his filmography, which is a shame because this really surprised me. It's very different than his other work. It's a grounded crime story that really delves into the human element of being accused of a crime and the toll that it takes on you and your family. It's more so a procedural drama than anything. And Henry Fonda and especially Vera Miles are fantastic in this. And that was it. So after doing this challenge, I feel like I definitely want to try this again. It helped me watch more things I had kind of stockpiled over the years, and it just was kind of refreshing to just have certain limitations than going to a streaming service or trying to rummage through lists on Letterboxd. You're stuck with just what you own. I really enjoyed this challenge, and I'm curious if anybody else has tried this challenge and what you thought of it too. All right, that's it. See you later.